There's the audio.
I heard that.
He's
Okay.
going to get you in the spirit.
Okay, that's a good place for me. How's that for you?
Bring it in this way a little bit. There we go. And
Good.
slide it.
Yep.
Render Crayton interview, take one.
Patrick, could you spin the monitor right now? It's full of reflection. There you go. Perfect. Does that work for you?
Yeah, that's great.
I always wanted to be behind one of those clickers where they go,
You know
bam,
what? We're going to give you
Roll
a
'em.
chance. Did I lose my pen? Oh, well.
Yeah, here.
roll 'em.
It's really my pen.
Yeah, I steal her pen. First off, I want to explain that we're well armed with hot tea and cough drops and everything else. But as I am suffering from an upper chest thing, if I find I have to cough, I will put my hand up. And if you continue to talk or something, I'll just try to stop you. And then we'll pick it up again. And I apologize up front.
No, it's okay.
Nature is being what it is. But we've actually been able to go pretty well this morning without any coughing. So
And also, I'm not here, so you should always look at Patrick and also just ignore the cameras entirely and just all the time just be looking at Patrick.
I thought that was you with that rectangular head there.
Yeah, that is me. Yeah.
first of all, I want to thank you for your contribution and your willingness to participate in this.
Well, you're lucky because I would have, many times I was getting ready to back out.
I understand that, and I actually want to thank you for your nervousness as well, because you know I had quite a bit of experience in front of the camera as well as behind it. I used to do a lot of commercial acting, and one of the things that actors find out is that when you're afraid, when you're nervous, you're close to the truth. When you starting a scene, if you're just blasé, you're in danger. If you are nervous and afraid, then you're close to something that is unexpected in you. Or what the value of this project is the honesty of you and your memories. And so there's really nothing to perform here at all. There's no one but you who can tell your story.
Okay.
So often I like to start by asking the question, how is it that you first became attracted to the military? Did you have a relative or someone who inspired you that way?
Well, as a kid, we had an airfield, a small airfield right outside of my small town in Georgia. And the B-17s used to come up and practice landings. And I had an uncle that used to take me out and watch me and let me watch the B-17s take off and landing. And boy, that got my attention, and I always wanted to do that. And then one day he got me a ride in a biplane and open cockpit, and that solidified it. I was hooked. So,
Beautiful. And how did you end up in the Navy?
I went to Georgia Tech, and Georgia Tech was a land grant college, and you were required to do 2 years of ROTC. So I walked into this big auditorium where people were registering for classes, and some guy looked at me and said, "Which one of these services do you want to belong to?" And I looked at the Army, and they had on these dull, drab uniforms, and looked at the Air Force, and they looked pretty good in their uniforms, their blue uniforms. But then I looked at the Navy, and they were all spiffy in their blues and their ribbons and their epaulets and everything. And I said, that's what I want to do. I had no idea what I was doing. So that's how I chose the Navy.
Wow, that's a great story. I've never heard the likes of that story before, and that's great. You checked focus on this, did you?
It's good, yeah. I just checked it. It's good.
Because I realized that I had focused on the color chart and hadn't flipped it back. I love that story. You ended up in the Navy because of their uniform.
Uniform.
So you did not go through the academy. You went
No, I went through the ROTC.
the ROTC program.
Yeah.
And how does that differ for you when you would meet graduates at the academy? Was there some kind of
No, I was always kind of, in a way, I was kind of disappointed that I didn't go to the Naval Academy. I had a chance to go, and I just didn't do it. And so I was always pretty disappointed that I didn't do that. But it worked out okay.
What did you see as the advantages of those who had a Naval Academy background, or were there advantages?
You know, very few actually, because we would go on these summer cruises and summer outings with Naval Academy graduates, and you know, I just didn't see any difference. I mean, they put on their shoes one at a time and the pants one leg at a time, and it was just like the rest of us.
That's great.
They were a little bit more versed in maybe terminology and protocol and military bearing and things, but not much difference.
Great. And did that carry over to when you were incarcerated in the Hanoi prison systems? Did you
Not
see-
at all, none. I mean, it was all an amalgamation of everything, all different ranks, all different backgrounds, all different races. So, you know, you were just one of the guys.
Let's talk about your the build up to your shoot down experience. What carrier were you flying off of?
Well, I went to Vietnam in 1964 on the USS Ticonderoga, and happened to be there during the Gulf of Tonkin debacle. And you read all these stories about Admiral Stockdale flying at night looking for PT boats. Well, I was out there right with him. And I don't know, for some reason, I don't know why I wasn't killed that night, because it was low, overcast, and I'm flying around 50 feet above the water and looking for these PT boats. And somehow or another, I managed to get back to the carrier alive. And then the next day, we went on a strike to Ben, and I was leading the A4s that were in that contingent. And then so that all happened, and I got my first taste of combat that day. And came back to San Diego, and I spent I got married, spent about 5 months retraining, and then went back to Vietnam on the Ticonderoga, and had flown a whole bunch of missions, and then on February the 7th, 1966, I was shot down.
Let's back up to the Ticonderoga and the Gulf of Tonkin incident. We interviewed Jim Stockdale's, Admiral Stockdale's son.
Jim?
Yeah, and he talked about that incident, and his dad was very concerned during the time when he was incarcerated that the Vietnamese might figure out that he had the intel that night when all of you went out to search for I think it was PT boats that were supposedly
PT boats,
right,
yes.
that you never found anything but dolphins and seals.
No.
Did you share a similar concern? Did you feel that your experience that night informed you in any way? Because the way that Jim described it was that once then Commander Stockdale, right, got back to the Ticonderoga, you were all debriefed and told not to share any of that information with anyone.
Right.
Can you talk about that a little bit? Because it certainly informed Admiral Stockdale's time under torture. I wondered if it did that for you.
No, I just got back and they told me just play like it never happened. It's kind of hard to do, but because it was so scary out there that night, and I didn't know, what really had happened. I don't know whether there were boats out there. Could have been boats out there, really, PT boats, but we didn't see any.
And the next day, when Lyndon Johnson announced our escalation into the war effort, did you have any specific reaction or feelings about that, based on your experience that night?
Yeah, I thought, great, we're going to war.
Okay, so it was a relief to, great,
Yeah.
good, thank you. Let's talk about the shoot-down and what had happened that way.
Well, I went out with a flight of, I was leading a flight of 4 other A4s, and we went out on a mission to bomb some coastal batteries that were shelling the destroyers that were going up and down the coast of Vietnam. And we went out and dropped our bombs, and unfortunately the bombs that we had were not properly fused because that had been determined by the high powers in Washington, which they always did. They told you what kind of bombs to carry and what fuses to use, and they never got it right. And so we dropped these bombs, and they just hit the sand, and little puffs of sand came up, and that was it. So we dropped our bombs, and then our next task was to go road recce up Highway 1 and see what we could find. And we went over to the railroad tracks, and there was kind of scattered clouds below us, and I saw some box cars on a siding, and I said, okay, I'm gonna go get those. So I dove down through the clouds, and as soon as I got underneath, boy, I got hit by all kinds of anti-aircraft fire. And I heard this loud bang, and so I obviously knew I was hit. So I turned back towards the ocean, which was not too far away, to South China Sea. But my wingman kept saying, hey, you're on fire, you gotta get out, you gotta get out. And I just said to myself, hell no, I am not getting out. I'm going for the water. So I thought they could pick me up there because I knew that there were rescue helicopters out there. But I got about halfway to the coast, and my airplane just decided it was not going to fly anymore. I mean, I had really been working hard trying to keep that thing in the air and keep it level, and it finally just turned over on its side and did a nosedive for the deck. And about halfway down, I said, I'm not getting out of this thing. I do not want to get captured. And then I looked out, and I see this ground coming up pretty fast. And I'm thinking, well, I better get out of here. So I pull the ejection level harness really over my head, And the next thing I knew, it blew me out of the airplane like it was supposed to, and everything worked fine. Because I was, at that point, kind of in a state of shock, and I don't know what I would have done had not the automatic system worked. But anyway, I do know that I'd gone through all this training about how to land once you got out of an airplane. And you were supposed to bend your knees and roll over to one side. I hit down in a rice paddy so hard that if I'd landed on land, I would have killed myself. But fortunately, I landed in that rice paddy up to my waist and above. And my shoulder was all beat up because coming down, I was reaching for something on my survival vest with my arm, and I didn't have a right arm, and I couldn't figure out what happened. I said, oh my God, I lost my arm. And then I reached over and I looked up into the risers, and my arm was back of my head and all tangled up in the risers. So it was just pulled way out of joint. And I just could pull it back down. But that injury stayed with me the whole time. And I just never got it taken care of because there was no medical care to help me out. But,
So it was completely dislocated and torn in the
it was dislocated, the bone, the ball was all broken up and everything. And actually, once I got to the camp, and that was a story in itself because once I got in the rice paddy, there were all of these workers, peasants, working in the rice fields, and they all had these old World War II rifles slung over their shoulders. And so they started coming to get me, and I had this .32 pistol in my survival vest. I pulled that out. I couldn't hit the side of a barn with it anyway, but I started pinging away at them, and it didn't seem to bother them at all because I didn't come close to them. But my wingmen were trying to help me out, and they just kept flying low passes over me. They saw me in the rice paddy. And finally, I told the A4s, I said, you guys are running out of fuel. You go home. I'll take care of myself. And about that time, some A1s came in, and they had a lot of fuel, and they made a bunch of runs. And then, fortunately, I was calling the whole time. I could see the South China Sea, and I could see a rescue helicopter going back and forth up and down the coast. And I kept telling one of my wingmen who had gone up high to be a communications relay, I kept telling him, I see the helicopters, get him the hell down here. And he kept calling, saying, he's 10 miles off the beach. 10 miles off the beach. So what they thought, the rescue people thought, was I was 10 miles into the South China Seas. So they're sitting out there looking, and I kept screaming at him, and I don't want on camera tell you the words I used to tell him to get the heck that rescue helicopter in there. So he finally must have figured it out, and the rescue helicopter came in, and he hovered over my chute, and I'm as far away from him as I am from you right now, from that helicopter. And the Vietnamese was scared to death of that thing because it was a door gunner with a gun there. And so I don't know why they didn't shoot it down right there, because it was just sitting there. And finally they piled on top of me, and the pilot couldn't see me, so he knew he couldn't get me. So he just took off and left. And so I'm sitting there with all these Vietnamese on top of me. They're tearing my clothes off, ripping my watch off. A funny story about my watch. I had done a couple of tours over in the Mediterranean, and when we would go into some of those Mediterranean ports, they'd have vendors who would come aboard the ship. And there was this one particular watch that they would sell, and it cost $4. But it ran for about 6 months, and then it quit. But it was a good watch to wear in an airplane, because you didn't want to wear your good watch because you scratched it all up. So we used to buy a bunch of those, and we'd wear it for 6 months. It'd quit running, throw it away, put on another one. And these guys are fighting over that $4 watch, and I always wondered what they thought when 2 or 3 months later it just quit. So I was glad they got it. Maybe it taught them a lesson. But that's the story of my shoot down.
And what was your rank upon shoot down?
I was a lieutenant commander. I was 33 years old. And I was the operations officer of VA 56, which was an A4 squadron, A4E squadron.
And what was going through you that night as you're watching this helicopter lift away? You know that's your last chance for freedom, and you've got all these people surrounding you who you don't speak their language, and I'm assuming they're hostile toward you. What were the feelings going through you?
Well, to tell you the truth, I was hurting so bad, all I could think about was how bad I was hurting. Because the back of my head, the helmet had come off and banged up the back of my head, and my shoulder was all screwed up, my knee was screwed up. And so, I just kept thinking, okay, they know where I am, so they're going to come get me. And I kept thinking, maybe they're going to come get me. But they didn't come. So.
And had CAG Stockdale been shot down at this point?
Yes, he had.
So, where were you taken first? To hello?
Okay, I walked. Of course, they took my shoes, and I walked for about 7 days. Actually, 7 nights, because they'd walk me at night, and put me in a hut during the daytime, so the airplanes couldn't see me. And finally got to some spot where a truck picked me up and took me directly to Hanoi. And that's when I entered the dreaded Wallow prison.
So, I'm assuming you're feeling pretty low at this point. You've been shepherded and
I was pretty low, yeah.
poked at and prodded, and
Yeah,
was the trip down for those 7 days pretty difficult?
yeah. Well, I was walking barefooted and over some pretty rough terrain.
Now, upon entry into the Wallow prison, were you assigned a cell by yourself? What happened?
Yes, I went in right into what was called New Guy Village, and there were single cells on both sides of this corridor. And as a matter of fact, they are still there. They turned Wallow into a museum, and so that was one part of it that they left intact. So I was in there by myself, and they threw me in there, and I looked at that thing, and there was just this concrete slab, and at the end of it were these leg irons, rusty old leg irons. And I said, oh my God, I'm in for it. And sure enough, they put me in those leg irons, and then they came in and they put me in handcuffs behind my back. But that didn't last too long because they wanted, I think, to test me and see what I was willing to give them. And but the one good thing was, the saving grace was that I was able to get in contact with the guy in the cell next to me. And he taught me the tap code by doing, he would tap Morse code, which I understood. And that way we were able to communicate enough where he would say, okay, look at that. Is there a 5x5 matrix on your wall in there where somebody had scratched it? And I said, yeah. And he said, that's what we're going to do. One is for the first row and so forth. And so from there on out, I was able to communicate with him. And I asked him one day, I said, how long have you been here? He said, 2 months. And I tapped back to him, I said, how in the world do you stand it? Not knowing that I was going to be there another 7 years. So he just said, and he told me the thing that helped me the most, I think, was you take it one day at a time. And so that's what I tried to do the rest of the time. We had guys who were ultimate optimists. And they would say, okay, the war's going to be over in 2 weeks. And they'd pass that word along, and 2 weeks would come and the war was not over. And then they'd say, okay, it's going to be over in a month. And a month would come and it wouldn't be over. And I just never got caught in that trap. I just always said, I'll get out when I get out, and I'll take it one day at a time.
Do you remember who that was who communicated with you first?
Yeah, it was Coffee, Jerry Coffee. And Jerry
Can you
and
say
I,
that again? I'm sorry, I stepped on you. Can you say who it was?
Jerry Coffee. And Jerry and I have been good friends since.
Yeah, we wanted to interview Jerry. He had some medical issues going on at the time. So,
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that.
yeah. So, but his name comes up a lot.
Oh, yeah. When he got out, he went on a speaking tour. And, I mean, if you could hear his story, I mean, mine pales the way he tells it. Because he did it with a flourish.
So many of you have talked about this moment, the moment of the first communication. And as we talked about the day I met you, our country went into Vietnam with a kind of the iconography of John Wayne in our minds. We were the invincible. We had won every war we had fought in, and we had superior technology and superior aircraft and everything else. We were just going to roll over the Vietnamese. And as you've talked about, and many of your fellow former POWs have talked about, the Washington restricted your choices in ways that, from a military standpoint, were not well advised. There were a lot of reasons why the war went the way it did, but no matter what, we were not prepared for what we encountered. And one of the reasons the story of the POWs is the story of America in some ways, is because in this intensely concentrated fashion, you went through what the country was going through in this terms of being stripped down and having to force to reevaluate and finding something to fight for that was core and beyond politics and everything else. But we perhaps missed so many things that you had, and the things that you learned to fight for one another, to back up one another, to pull together as a team, to never be really truly alone, to understand, as Jerry Coffey did that night when he heard the rustling of a new guy being put in there, I gotta get to him. I know what he's gonna go through. I gotta help him. I gotta help him communicate with this lifeline. So I kind of wanted to just touch on those points, and as we progress in talking about this, I kind of want to sometimes relate back to that, this moment for yourself. Your shoulder's been shattered, you're in a lot of pain, you're scared, you're alone, and describe how Jerry first got in touch with you. Did you just hear through the walls, or what?
I just started tapping on the wall, just doing Morse code by.
Was there a light in your cell? Describe it as much as you can.
It was just this cell that was about 7 feet long and probably 5 feet wide. And there was a window in the back of the cell, but they had put bamboo over it. So it was dark, but there was one single light bulb that was just hanging there that was on all the time. So it was kind of dark and dingy and moldy and just dirty, just gross. I mean, I don't think I'd ever been in a place that was that dirty.
And did you lay down on the concrete slab?
Yeah.
When did you first hearing those sounds to the walls?
I was just lying on that slab, and I was right next to his wall, to the wall between us, and I could hear this noise, and I finally figured out what it was. I didn't know at first, and then he just kept going, and I figured out he was tapping the Morse code.
And it's difficult to tap in Morse code because the dash is...
Yeah, you just dash, scrape and dot, scrape, dot, like SOS would be scrape, dot, dot, scrape, whatever it is.
And describe how it felt to suddenly realize there was another human being communicating.
Well, it felt really good because I felt like I was no longer alone, because on that trip I had to Hanoi, I mean, I was all by myself, and there was no what I considered human beings anywhere near me. And so it was a good feeling to know that there was a person there that I could rely on, and so that kind of carried through to the whole thing. I mean, that's the thing that kept us all alive, was being with other people and being able to communicate with them and knowing that you were not the only one there. So,
Can you remember a moment later when, remembering that night when Jerry first reached out to you, you motivated you to do the same for someone else?
yeah, I did on several occasions when new guys would come in. By that time, we had figured out how you could whisper under the door and to them. So you didn't have to go through the Morse code thing. You just call them and say, hey, what's your name? And do you know the code? And they'd say no, and you'd tell them to look on the wall, because just about every wall of that cell block had this 5x5 matrix scratched into the bricks, bricks on the wall. And so from that, they got the picture pretty quick.
This is it's so wonderful, Render. I mean, there are things that you're saying that I've never heard before. I did not know that everyone had scratched that matrix into those walls in New Guy Village. That's
Well, I think they were all in most of them. I mean, I was in a couple of cells in there, and it was there. And then sometimes I'd go to other camps, and it'd be there too, where they'd put people in there that had not gone through New Guy Village.
So then the Vietnamese came and got you and started to interrogate you.
Right.
Now, my understanding is pilots by design don't really have a lot of military intel to share. You're given the flight codes for a 7 days of advance in mission at most.
I didn't know anything. I mean, all I knew was I was supposed to take off, go bomb something, and go home, and then go back, get up at night, and do the same thing over again. So, I was the low man on the totem pole.
So, describe a little bit about the interrogation. What were they after? What were they trying to get you to do?
They wanted you to tell the American people that we were against the war and that the war was not right and that we had no business being there. And of course, we tell them, no, we're not gonna do that. I'm not gonna do that. And they'd just keep hammering you, and they'd send you back to your cell, put you in stocks, or put you in the handcuffs, or do something to you to try to convince you that you needed to write a letter. And I remember mainly they wanted me to write a letter to Ted Kennedy and tell him that I didn't think the war was right and that we should be fighting it and that we were killing these poor people and we needed to get out of there and so forth. So there were several people who I've forgotten that. It was Ted Kennedy and somebody else that they wanted me to write a letter to that I wouldn't do it. One of the anti-war senators. But unfortunately, like most of the other prisoners, you finally just kind of gave up and there wasn't anything you could do, and you'd write something that'd be gobbledygook. I mean, it wouldn't make much sense. So anybody that got the letter that you had written would know that something was wrong.
So let's break that down a bit. The military code of conduct, as you understood it, restricted you to give nothing more than name, rank, and serial number.
Right. And, you know, I think I and most of the other prisoners tried to stick to that as long as they could. But eventually you just couldn't take it any longer. And they'd use a rope treatment on you where they'd almost break both your shoulders, and so you had to give somewhere. And believe me, it didn't sit well with me. I mean, I've stayed up many a night thinking about that, thinking about why I shouldn't have done that, and why I couldn't hold out longer than I did, and so forth. But finally, I think it was Jim Stockdale who came up with the idea. I'm not sure it was Jim, but it was one of the guys came up with the idea that you could, if you got to the point where you couldn't take it any longer, you would give them something, but then you'd go back to your cell and you would kind of take a break, so to speak, and then you'd come back fighting again. And so that's what you did. I mean, you'd write a letter, and then they'd come back, and they'd think that they had you, and they'd come back a few days or a week later, and they'd want you to write a letter to somebody else, and you'd tell them, hell no, I'm not going to do that. And then they'd beat you again. And they beat you down, and you go back to your cell, and you come back when they call you back again, and just go through the same drill again. But which I think actually made a lot more sense than. I mean, you could. We had some guys, some really tough guys who just stuck by the code of conduct, and they paid with their lives. So I guess I could have done that. Sometimes I think, maybe you should have. So I think about that. And I am certainly not proud of what I did. But at the time, I thought I did the best I could.
Render, you're an amazing man. I'm really honored to meet you. I really am honored to meet you. What the things you're saying, the honesty, it's just extraordinary. You okay? Yeah.
Are we off that thing now?
Oh no, it's still recording. Do you need a little break?
No.
Good.
No.
You want a drink of water?
No, just a big shot of vodka, please.
Shot of
So this is such an important thing. We have young people who are entering the military, going through tours in Iraq, Afghanistan. We have suicide bombers. We have every day in the news there's some crazy act of terror. The world has changed from,
Yeah, it's gone crazy.
yeah. And as many of your former fellow POWs have said, we understood the rules of engagement. The Vietnamese understood the rules of engagement. We were an army, we were a military service, they were a military service. We were going to fight it out. We didn't necessarily take it personally against the other person. We didn't think they were a bad person or not. We were trying to fight about these ideas and whatever. And now it's these random acts of violence and school shootings, and just there are no ranks and there are no uniforms, and there's no code. One of the things that is so important that all of you teach us is the power of having an individual and a collective code together. Every one of you who I have met and talked to has described the exact same thing that you just gave voice to. The personally, deeply shaming experience of feeling like you were forced into something that your code restricted you from giving. And as you described, and I do believe that CAG was the architect of that change, when we talked to his son, apparently CAG had shared with his son that he was pretty clear he would likely be court-martialed when he returned for the changing of the code of conduct, the changing of the understanding and the application of the code of conduct. And he did that at risk because he knew all of you and him needed some change. And because so many young people now are returning from the field of engagement, having witnessed so many atrocities and everything else, and the PTSD rates are going up, and one of the reasons is that by all accounts, all of you should have been suffering enormously from PTSD given what you went through. And yet, for the most part, you don't.
I can tell you why. Because we had this sense of comradeship, that we were a unit and that we were sticking together against, we were still fighting the battle. And I think that saved most of us from PTSD. We were never alone. After your first day there, you felt like you were part of something. And it was just like a big squadron, and then toward the end, they call it the 4th Allied POW wing. They made it into a unit. And so I think that's part of why you don't see that much PTSD out of us. Plus the fact that, most of us were college graduates. We were primarily officers. So we kind of knew what we were getting into to start off with, and, we knew what our responsibilities were, and that we knew that, like I knew I was a lieutenant commander, and I knew that I had a responsibility to take some JG that just came into the camp and, kind of take him under my wing and teach him the ropes. And so I think that's part of the reason for the non-PTSD prevalence in the POWs.
There's so many factors here. And you've alluded to two of them, and two major themes of importance. The first being get to the new guy, communicate, teach him a way to communicate. From that moment on, you're not alone. The second was that you had wise leadership. Guys like Stockdale were looking at the situation on the ground and adjusting. When you were forced to give more than name, rank, and serial number, what kind of emotions did that put you through? And did you get any help from your fellow POWs in addressing those feelings?
No, not really, because I was pretty much in solitary when they were making me write that stuff. And of course, as I said, I would write it, and then I wouldn't sleep at night thinking about how I could have not written that. How I could have possibly gotten out of not writing that. And I knew what the alternative was, so, and I just was very disappointed in myself that I didn't have the strength to just keep fighting it until death, I guess.
And yet, Stockdale taught you how to fight, how to wage a war behind the walls.
Yeah, but that was kind of later on. That was kind of midway through the captivity. I mean, we were kind of on our own in the first part of it. In the early years, we didn't have those kind of guidelines.
Let's talk about, you were the SRO for a while in one of the camps, were you not?
Yes, they came in one night and plucked out 70 of us and took us to a camp that was about 40 miles northwest of Hanoi, and it was in a place called Sante, which we named it Camp Hope. But usually, if you went to a new camp, the first thing you would do would be to find out who the senior ranking officer was. I mean, we had this thing. We were military people, so we wanted to know what the military hierarchy was and where we fit into the thing. So the night we got there, we started tapping around the walls, and it went from one room to another to find out who was the senior ranking officer. And I wasn't concerned about it. I told them what my date of rank was, and I just figured that there'd be a Stockdale or a Reisner or somebody there that was senior to me, because I felt like I was kind of a junior guy. There was a lot of senior officers there. And it came all the way around the walls, came back to me, and the guy next to me said, "You lucky guy, you're the SRO." And I said, "Oh my goodness," because I knew what happened to SROs. They got the blame for everything. And I don't care what anybody in that camp did, they would blame me. So they would call me in and said, whatever my name was, Khan, they call me. Khan, you do bad things. You incite them to do other things. And so they let me go for a while, and then they would they moved me around so that I couldn't communicate. They tried to keep me from communicating with the other guys. So they put me inside a building, in a room inside the building with no outside access at all, to try to keep me that way. Well, that didn't work because we would stamp on the floor with the tap code with our feet, and the other people could hear it. So anyway, that's the way it went. And but I think I did a pretty good job there. I don't know. They gave me the Distinguished Service Medal for it. I don't know why, but anyway, they did. But I remember that at one of the reunions, one of the guys who was there, he came up to me and he said, been needing to tell you this, said, but I want to tell you that you saved my life at Sante. And that, I'll tell you, that really made me feel good. But he had been really sick. And so I had passed the word around to all our people that anytime they went to what we call a quiz with the camp commander, to tell them that they needed to give Smitty some medical treatment. And so finally he got some medical treatment, and he came out of there okay.
And this is Smitty Harris, right?
Yeah.
And he did an incredible thing for all of you POWs as well, because wasn't he not the person who first told Bob Shoemaker about the tap code?
Yeah, he did. I don't know how he knew about that. I don't remember now how he got that. But I think that thing had been around for a long time, the tap code. It'd just been buried in some old history books. And
the story that Shu told us was that he and Smitty and two other guys were in a cell early on, and Shu, having a background in cryptology and communication, said, we need a way to communicate. And Smitty said, well, I was in a survival training in Korea. And they didn't actually teach this during the survival training, but one day we were at lunch, and at the next table I overheard a sergeant describing a code that they used in the concentration camps in Germany. They were all connected by a steam pipe, and they found that if they tapped on this steam pipe, it could be heard all the way down the barracks. So they developed this tap code, the matrix, for that, and Smitty told that to Bob, and Bob said this is perfect, and that was the birth of the tap code for the. And so sometime later, describe that a little bit. My understanding is Smitty and was it Fred Flom?
yeah.
I think they had some kind of it was a Burberry.
Gastrointestinal.
Yeah, they
They
were
were sick.
really sick, and you were watching them. Describe that and what went through you and how you decided to act on it.
Well, I knew I had to do something. I was the SRO. I was in charge, and they were my subordinates, so to speak. I mean, I didn't have any really rank to pull on them or anything, but I just felt like it was my duty to tell the Vietnamese that they were really sick and they had to do something for them. So.
And there was risk involved in.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Let's talk about that risk, because it was not in.
Well, the risk was for them to find out that I was the SRO, and then, everything that happened, it was my fault. I mean, they would come to me and say that so-and-so did this, and you told him to do that. And I'd say, I didn't tell him to do that. I didn't know it. There's no way for me to tell him. I can't talk to him. You put him in the cell way over there, and I'm in one way over here. How could I talk to him?
But in fact, there was a risk because the way I heard this story was that you made a decision to get these two guys help. And what you were going to have to do was force the camp commander. You basically threatened the camp commander.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Well, I just told him that if he didn't give them help, that we were going to riot. That he was going to see from all of us that we were going to do something. I said we were going to bang on the doors, tear down the doors, whatever we had to do, but we were going to do something en masse if they didn't help them. And I don't know whether he was concerned about that or not, but they got the medical treatment. So.
And there was an additional risk to this because you're telling them you don't have any communication.
But yet I knew all of this stuff. So I'm sure they figured it out pretty quick that I was communicating with them.
So if you could put that in your own words, by actually acting to help Smitty and Fred, you put yourself at risk because you revealed to the Vietnamese that you could actually communicate to all of these people.
Yeah, see, they didn't want us to communicate, and they were, we spent a lot of our time trying to figure out new ways to communicate. And they did not want us to communicate. So if I told them that I knew all this stuff about Smitty and Fred, then they knew I was communicating. So I was violating the, quote, camp rules, which said you will not communicate with other prisoners.
And additionally, was it not that what you instructed through the walls was every prisoner should communicate this?
Right.
So then they were going to have these voices from all over this camp.
Yeah, I told everybody, I passed the word around that anybody that went to a quiz was to tell them, first thing they would do was to tell them, you got to get Smitty and Fred some medical treatment. So that just kind of blew the whole communications thing right there. But I guess they figured there wasn't anything they could do about it after that.
Let's go back to the moment when you discovered you were the SRO, because that's something that eventually every young officer, encounters. The day you actually find out you have to step up and you have to take the lead. And it scared you at the time, and you demonstrated in this story, and it's so moving for me. I mean, and how beautiful that Smitty would come up to you years later and say, thank you for saving his life. It's just a beautiful story, sir. So talk about that moment. You find out you're the SRO, and what does that mean to you? And talk about the feelings you went through.
Well, if I wasn't on camera, I would tell you what I said when I found out. It was O.S. blank, blank, blank. Because all this time, I'd just been a foot soldier. I mean, the SRO told me to do this, I did it. And somebody else above him would tell me to do something, I would do it. And then all of a sudden, it was up to me to tell all these 70 guys what they were supposed to do. And I just, at the time, didn't know whether I was up to it or not. So I just had to suck it up and get my stuff in gear and go do it. And, I'd had some good training on how to be an SRO by just watching some of the others in the other camps. So it was, to my way of thinking at that time, it was not a privilege to be the SRO.
And let's talk about that, because Did you, in your own mind, as you get this sort of shocking news that you're gonna be the senior ranking officer, and suddenly you're responsible for these over 70 guys? Who did your thoughts turn to? Did you look in that moment to guys like CAG or Robbie or?
Yeah, I thought back about some of the things that Robbie had said. Robbie was a real inspiration in the first part of that. I don't know, he kind of faded in the background towards the end of the captivity, but he was a real inspiration to me and to a lot of other people in the beginning. And I just kind of looked to some of the things that he had said and some of the ways that he had treated different situations, and tried to just emulate him. And of course, also with Admiral Stockdale, he was also somebody that I'd looked up to and could try to gain from what he had said and done, really.
And it's an important thing. It's when we realize we have to assume the mantle of leadership.
That's a big responsibility.
And that we look to those who have
Gone
taught
before
us.
us.
Exactly.
Just look, guys that have gone before us.
So if, in your own words, putting that into your experience, reflecting back on your experience, it seems like what you're saying is that the key to the moment of assuming leadership is a combination of having those that you can learn from ahead of you and having the courage to step up and care about those who you lead.
Right.
If you could put that into your own words, that, because it's such, what you've said here is so fantastic and so at the core of parts of this project.
Well, you just said it.
I know, but I'm not going to have my voice on the edit. It's only yours. So I know I'm leading you a little bit, but you've actually say it so beautifully.
Well, what did you say so I can parrot you?
If you could, in your own words, characterize, like, I've waited in many ways to meet you because the thing that you're talking about right now, it's just such a big part of, imagine all these young midshipmen who are going to be, and eventually other branches of the military. They're scared. They don't know if they're going to ever be able to be leaders. And they can hear all these things from their teachers and stuff like that, but here you are in the moment of the emotion of it. Like, it taps all the way through the walls and it comes back to you, and it's your turn to step up. What did they need to think about? And if they want to prepare themselves for that moment?
Well, they need to think that they are foot soldiers now, but maybe tomorrow something will happen and they'll find out that they are now in charge and that they are the leaders, and they need to put all of these leadership skills to play to take care of the people under them. And so you just never know. I mean, if you're on a ship and the ship's going down, and you may end up in a lifeboat or something like that, and you'll find out that you're the one that's got to take charge of that lifeboat, although you've never been in charge of anything yet in your life. And you just have to go back and try to figure out what other people have done, what you've read in books and so forth about leadership, and put them all into play.
But also key to this in the story of Fred and Smitty is this leadership, in your own words, leadership is also caring about what's happening. Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm just double checking. Go ahead, don't let me have it here.
Like it's personally the challenge to you to now I'm in charge. Now what is it that I do? But it's also that ingredient that what good leaders care. If you could,
Well, good leaders care about their men or their women nowadays, and you have to take care of them. You're a father figure to them, and you have to nurse them, you have to teach them, and you have to help them, you have to lead them by the hand if you have to. And it's just, I don't know, leadership is to me it's very difficult for me to see how somebody can teach leadership. I have always felt that it's something that's within you. And some people are natural leaders and some are not. And I wouldn't say I was a natural leader, but at least I knew what my responsibilities were. And I couldn't get up and give a fiery brimstone speech to my troops and tell them that now I'm in charge and you got to do this and you got to do that. But it's just I don't know, an ethereal quality that some people have, and I was afraid I didn't have it, but I think I did all right. It was all right.
you saved 2 men's lives.
Yeah, I did. And I kind of didn't save some others. I give a good example of that. We had this tough guy with us called Orson Swindle, who was a Marine, and they put Orson on a stool and made him sit there day and night until he wrote something. And I'd get these messages from people saying, hey, you got to tell Orson that he has to give them what they want. And they'd come from different people, and I heard this for several days. And I finally just tapped on the wall and I said, Orson is a tough Marine. Orson is going to know when it's time to give up. And he appreciated the fact that I didn't get him off of there, that I let him make the decision himself because I knew he would do the right thing. So, you have to know your people. And I knew that Orson was tough, and I knew that he would do the right thing. So I didn't help him a lot.
Excuse me. We're going to be interviewing Orson in a couple of weeks.
Oh, really?
I appreciate you telling that story because I'll be able to share it with him.
Yep. Well, he is a tough guy. I'll put it that way.
So I have heard. Okay. So one of the aspects we often talk about leadership, but one of the things that makes good leaders, and the Navy has talked about this, about followership. Like you talk about, you were a junior officer, you did what you were told. Was there anything about the time when you were not stepping up to be a leader that taught you how to be a better leader? Excuse me. Excuse me 1 second.
I don't know. That's a hard question. I think that, sometimes I would see things that the SRO would do or one of the leaders would do, and I would think, well, I don't think that's right. Now, I don't know who was I to say it was right or wrong, but I think I learned from that some of the things that I should do when I was a leader, that I would not do something like that. I would not tell somebody that they had to stay on the stool until they died, and but I don't know. I just, just to be in the company of those people basically was taught me good lessons. And I always had hoped that, that they would, that my, the guys that were with me at Sante, that they would treat me like I was somebody like CAG or Robbie Reisner or somebody, and look up to you. You can't force them to do something, and you can't. You just have to. You have to show them that you have the skills, the leadership skills, and they'll follow you. But, that was one good thing about being in that military organization, is that if they got over the initial skepticism of you as a leader, then they would follow you.
George Coker spoke to us about the realization that those who follow want to be led. They want good leaders. Like, you don't resent leadership when it's good leadership. You want it.
Oh,
Is
yeah.
that your experience?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, we really, we just relied so much on Robbie Reisner and CAG, and that it's amazing the I don't want to say the pull, but the web that they wove us into. We would anything you would do, almost you would say, well, I wonder what CAG thinks of that. I wonder what Robbie would say about that. And so, I just had great respect for them. And when I became the SRO, I was hoping that I could conjure up some of that myself.
Well,
I didn't come close to them, but I hope it worked out all right.
We've been at this for, an hour and a half. Do you want to take a little break? Just maybe use the restroom or just get up and stretch a bit? We can
Okay.
give you a little break, because you're doing such an amazing job.
Tail sticks, please.
Yeah, let's do a
Tail sticks before we back.
Oh, it's so good.
Am I sure? Am I tethered?
You're gonna get it, you're tethered.
Yeah, you're tethered. Hang on a sec.
Can you see this?
I can see it.
Can you?
Yep. It's tail sticks.
You're going to cut audio now?
Cut.
Or you cut the camera?